Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm your host, Saul, and today we are diving into the world of enrolled agents. We have with us Jason Dinesen, experienced enroll agent and our course instructor for the enroll agent exam prep course. Jason, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thanks, all. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. To our listeners, whether you're a seasoned tax professional or just curious about this career path, this episode will offer a wealth of knowledge. Jason, before we jump in, could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you became involved with enroll agents?
Sure. So I haven't always been a tax professional. It's been 15 years now, which is a long time, but see, I'm kind of getting old, Saul. So it's like, well, it's been a while, and I've had a few different jobs through the years. I was actually a journalist for a number of years in the late 90s through the mid 2000s.
Wow.
Was a radio station news director, if you could
Oh,
believe.
yeah.
And I did that through early 2007.
Uh-huh.
And then I realized at that point that I needed something different and went back to school. My original thought, and I think this ties into the EA discussion quite well, actually, because my initial thought was I'm going to be a CPA.
Okay.
And I went back to school to finish out the 150 hours requirement.
Right.
And so I got an accounting certificate taking
Right.
night school while
Mm-hmm.
working for a third-party administrator of retirement plans. So
Right.
I actually have experience with 401k plan administration, defined benefit plans, and things like that. I did that for 4 years,
Oh, wow.
actually,
Wow.
and while going to school. But while in school, I discovered two things. One, at my age, it was going to be a little more difficult to meet that 2 year, well, it varies from state to state, but the apprenticeship requirement that you have to become a CPA.
Right.
And I started looking at other avenues. And would you believe, as I was taking my coursework, I discovered that my favorite class was individual income tax.
Nice.
And, and I started just investigating, what are some ways that I could do tax preparation because I really liked it. And I kind of just, I don't even remember how, but I stumbled across Enrolled Agent. And, in the college textbook, it wasn't the college textbook, because in a lot of those enrolled agents, you have to flip to the index and you find like a one sentence mention of
Uh-huh.
EAs somewhere, a lot of times deep in the textbook where the class never even gets that far.
Right.
So I can't remember how I found out about EAs,
Uh-huh.
but I realized with EAs, it's more attainable for
Mm-hmm.
people coming to the field later in life
Yep.
with diverse backgrounds. I think that's one of the real advantages of
Yep.
the enrolled agent designation is you don't have to have gone to college and gotten an accounting degree when you were 21 years old. You
Yep.
could have a completely different life experience and then come to it later, and it's much friendlier as far as getting your foot in the door. I wouldn't say it's easy. It is not easy to
Yep.
become an enrolled agent, but it's more open, I think, to a more diverse audience. And that was certainly the case for me. And I started studying well, I guess I won't say the name. They're still in business,
Uh-huh.
but it was a place that sold review material on index cards
Yeah.
attached, gigantic,
Oh,
several inches with the rings or whatever, and you flipped through the index
yeah.
cards, and that was how I studied. Um, and went and I took the three parts, and even that was 15 years ago. September 24th of 09 is when I got my enrollment card from the IRS. They still used Prometric back then, and the
Uh-huh.
IRS had been doing that for a number of years at that point. And that got me started. Then I started with 3 clients
Mm-hmm.
in 2000. Well, in 2009, while still working on my EA designation, I did 3 tax returns.
Nice.
And then it grew from there. At one point, I was doing almost 225 tax returns. That was during the pandemic,
Oh, wow.
2020.
Nice.
And now this past year, I think I'm coming in at like 170 or 175. So it's dropped some by design,
Yeah.
which I mean, that's another discussion, is the practice management side of things and so
Yeah.
forth. I mean, I guess the point is I do still a lot of tax work. And I also present. You can hear me, as you well know. You and I talk a lot, Saul, because I do a lot of stuff with MY-CPE and just in teaching continuing ed courses and so forth in general. So
Yep.
that's a
Yep.
little about me.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, like, I think you did tell me that, you started your career different and then you went here, but I didn't know that you were studying for CPA. I think we did have a small discussion about why don't you just continue it later on? Because now you're an EA and you've been doing it for quite a while and you've been successful. But, it's important that, this perspective of yours brings a lot of things. There are benefits of becoming an EA. I mean, there are other tax qualifications as well, like you mentioned, CPA, and there are others as well. But then EA has got an upper hand to other tax professionals. But specifically, like, if you if you could say in your own words, why is EA better than CPA? What would you say?
That's kind of a loaded question, so I'm going to choose my words carefully in response to that. But I think that you know, I think several things. One, as I just said in my introduction of who I am, EA is attainable to people who either can't meet all of the requirements to be a CPA, or they don't want to. I mean, there are, even in colleges nowadays, there's kind of a crisis in the CPA world of young people don't want to become CPAs.
Yeah,
And, maybe you don't want to get 150 hours and sit for a massive exam that's largely over auditing and all these other things when you're interested in tax. And the EA is the perfect avenue for that. The other thing about EA, you could go anywhere in the world or to any state in America when you're an EA. Whereas with a CPA, especially if you become a firm owner and your firm is here, but you want to move across the border, there's CPA portability, it's called, but
yep,
it's easier when you're an EA. You just kind of pack up and go, and that's fine.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. In fact, I think a lot of our audiences do not know where you are currently.
right. Well, I'm currently in the country of Portugal, actually, which is a long story involving some personal things, I guess, on my side. But like a lot of folks with COVID, we started looking at, why are we doing what we're doing, where we're doing it, and we'd talked for years about going on some kind of adventure, and we decided to just make it work.
Yeah.
And so I still have a US address, and because we're not like permanent, we're here in Portugal for as long as we can be, and we're on a visa that allows us to be here through at least 2025, and we will try to renew, but we still have an Iowa address. State of Iowa is where I'm from, so I still have an Iowa address, and that's where I still have a US based corporation there. I always say that I am an employee of my company, and my company has a generous remote work policy. So we're
Yeah.
taking advantage of the remote work policy. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you could be from anywhere and get the EA designation, and you can live here and then move here. And the EA designation comes with you, and you don't even have to apply for reciprocity from the state that you're now living in or anything like that. The EA designation just goes with you.
Yeah, and you mentioned this reciprocity. That's very interesting. In fact, while you were saying it, just clicked me, because when you're planning to do a CPA, you have to do it from that state. Like yeah, but EA is like an IRS recognized, so it's federally recognized, so it's like anywhere you can practice, anywhere you can represent the taxpayers, which I think is a privilege, because if my memory serves right, I guess apart from an EA, it's only the CPAs and the tax attorneys who are allowed to represent Yeah. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. The unlimited representation. And actually, it's not, just tax attorney, it's attorneys. So you don't even, as an attorney, you kind of get, in the door, whether you know what you're doing with taxes or not. I think in reality, it would mostly be tax attorneys who would probably be doing things. But yeah, Circular 230. So EAs are a Circular 230 practitioner. So
Yeah.
Circular 230 is the document from the Treasury Department that's like the, I don't know, the operating manual almost for practitioners. And so the people who have unlimited practice rights are EAs, CPAs, and attorneys.
Interesting. Interesting. It's fun, it's funny, you mentioned that because I once got curious that, where did this originate? Because I was like, where did this come out with? And I was so surprised to know that, there was this thing called the Horse Act of 1884 that was signed by the president, Chester Arthur. And I mean, the the role back then, I guess, of an enroll agent was because it was created as a reaction to the fraudulent war loss claims in the wake of the American Civil War. It's
Correct.
easy,
Yeah.
right?
So this is the 140th anniversary of EAs. That hit me just as I was logging on to the Zoom, and I was kind of looking at some of our talking points today and history of EAs. I was like, this is the 140th birthday of the enrolled agent. And
Wow.
you're correct, the Horse Act of 1884. And it's because during the Civil War in the United States, which is 1861 to 1865, afterwards, there were all these damage claims where people were claiming like their property was damaged in the war or whatever, and they were wanting restitution from the United States government. And all these people would just show up at the Treasury Department. So
Yeah.
the Treasury Department, now, why did it take 19 years? Yeah, I guess these things take time to come about, I guess, but the Treasury Department created the enrolled agent designation so that there could be some control over who was just showing up at the Treasury Department putting in these claims. So the term enrolled means that you're on a list somewhere to act as an agent, so on behalf of someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. It was funny. I was thinking, why the Horse Act? And then I came to know that it is because the the horses claim that, we're like
Yes.
much more than the horses that are actually there in the United States.
Yes.
So funny. But
Well,
it's really great, I mean, 140 years. I mean, and it's come a long way. And it just kind
yes,
of,
it has.
yeah, it kind of also shows that, the qualification has stood the test of time. It's a recession-proof career. You are a living proof of it, right? So
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be some kind of tax system in place. We never know how the political winds will blow or what those political winds will bring with them as far as changes to the tax system. But, there's always going to be some kind of tax system in place, even if there's some politicians will say, well, we're going to eliminate taxes or eliminate the IRS, but the government has to have money in some way. And
yeah,
there's always going to be a tax system of some sort. And so, EA, the real thing that EA does is not so much tax preparation, but it's the representation side of things, which means if you have a dispute with the government, an EA can step in and help you. That's really, we think of tax preparation. This is true with CPAs also. People think, oh, you prepare tax returns. And that's true, but you could do so much more on the
absolutely.
representation side. And I mean, I myself don't even really do much on the representation side. I've looked at it and taken some training on it. I haven't really stepped into that world too much, but it's always there as an option. So if tax simplification happens and there's not as much work for tax preparers, well, an EA can shift to doing other things in the tax world because, like I say, there's always going to be some kind of tax system in place, which means there's always going to be disputes with the government. So people are going to need someone to help them.
Absolutely. There are only two things certain in life, death and taxes.
That's right. That's right. You can't outrun the tax man.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's walk through, the steps for our listeners who might be thinking about this part. Can you outline the process of becoming an enroll agent?
Yeah. I mean, the test is done through a testing company called Prometric. And I think that visiting the Prometric website would be a good place to start
Yeah.
because they have an entire page of resources.
Mhm.
And once you decide, yeah, it's kind of funny. There's lots of different review places out there. Hopefully you use us, but there's lots of different options. And there's nowhere on the Prometric site or the IRS site that says anything about find a review place to work with. But that would be something too. Sign up with us would probably be a good first start, honestly. But you need to get a PTIN. And I
Yes.
think that's actually your first thing because I guess we should slow down a little bit. We're going
Yes.
in a lot of different directions here. You'll need to create an account with Prometric because you have to take the test through Prometric. In order to create an account with Prometric, you need a PTIN, a Preparer Tax Identification Number, which is
Correct.
provided by the IRS. You
Correct.
apply for it online. If you go to the IRS website, there's a list of the different things that you need when you apply. It's not really a difficult application, but there's some identifying documents that you have to upload depending on, like, if you're a US citizen who has a social security number, there's certain things you do. If now I know that we have a lot of listeners to this who are probably in India who will be wanting to take this exam. You may need to upload other forms of identification, and this will all be listed for you on the IRS website. You need to get that PTIN because the PTIN, you need to create an account at Prometric, but also enrolled agents must have a PTIN. And don't let that name Preparer Tax Identification Number fool you. Even if you never prepare a tax return, for as long as you're in EA, you need a PTIN, whether you do tax returns or not. So I think that's the number one thing. Get a PTIN. The fee right now is a weird number. It's $19.75 to
Yeah.
get a PTIN.
Yeah. I think it's
So
coming down, right? I mean,
it
I think,
has. It's dropped
yeah.
a few times over the last several years. Yeah.
Yeah. I happened to speak to, somebody else and I was asking them, why do you think this is dropping down? And she told me that, the reason why it's dropping is because the government wants to encourage more people to become enroll agents because they're running on a shortage. Like there's just so much that you can do, and they are actually running on a backlog. So they want to encourage more people to take this. It's really
Mm-hmm.
nice. Anywho, so first step, get your PT, which is a very simple online process, obviously. So that's done, and then you create an account with Prometric, right?
You create an account with Prometric,
Yep.
and then I would say study. And then when you're ready, so there's three parts to the exam: part
Right.
one, part two, part three.
Yep.
You can take those parts in any order that you want and on any time frame that you want. You have 3 years to successfully complete all three parts.
All right.
So you create the account at Prometric and then you schedule your exam. Now, if you're in the United States, there's zillions of Prometric sites all across the country, and you can just, I guess I'm not sure how far in advance you would want to book, probably a reasonable amount of time ahead of time, but there's dates and times that'll be available at multiple different testing centers across the country. Now, in India, there are certain dates. Now, maybe, I guess this is one thing I'm not sure of, is if there's Prometric centers in India that are open all the time, but the IRS and Prometric publicize certain dates in certain cities. So depending on where you are in the world, and this is all shown on the Prometric website.
Yep.
By the way, the name of this test is Special Enrollment Exam.
Yeah.
SEE.
Yep.
And so informally, we all call it the enrolled agent exam, but it's really special enrollment exam. If you go to the page, I'm looking at it right now as we're talking on the Prometric website, it'll talk about scheduling your exam and special information for international students. And it's not just people in India, they also have special dates for people in London, South Korea, Japan, and Toronto. So, if you're international, I would suggest looking at what it says on the Prometric website. If
Yeah,
you're in the
absolutely.
US,
Yep.
you just go to the Prometric. Once you have your account, you can just schedule on a date and time that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the privilege, India being one of those big countries and, having testing centers. It wasn't there like I think 3 to 4 years back, but I guess with the pandemic, it's all opened up and it's good. But we'll jump onto that a little bit later. But you mentioned about the three parts in the exam. Like there are three parts. Could you just enlighten everybody about what are those three parts? What do they cover? What are the knowledge areas that are covered there?
Yeah, so if we pare it down to the most basic, part one is individual income tax. Part two is businesses. And part three is representation and ethics. So
Yes.
part one would be all the different provisions relating to individuals as far as what is income of individuals, what are the tax credits, who can you claim as dependents, what sort of deductions are available. The business part gets pretty deep in some places. It's about business income and business expenses, but also the different types of businesses. So sole proprietor, partnership, S corporation, C corporation. And you also talk about estates and trusts, and nonprofits, tax exempt entities as well in part two. Part three, now I suppose as the instructor, maybe I shouldn't say this. Part three was my least favorite part when I took the exam. Now, people need to remember that was 15 years ago.
All right.
I was taking the exam, but I thought part three was hard because you go into a thing that's ethics.
Yeah.
That should be common sense.
Yeah.
But what you realize, and this is something I say nowadays as an instructor in the ethics classes that I teach, ethics does not mean that you are a good person or a bad person. Ethics is governed by rules like the Circular 230 document that I was talking about, and certain provisions in the tax code in the US about, tax prepared due diligence and so forth. And it's not you're a good person, so you have nothing to worry about. It's more, did you check all the boxes over here? Did you meet your due diligence on this? And what are the procedural steps on these different things over here? And you can sometimes run afoul of ethical rules without even knowing that you've done anything wrong. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that got me on the part three, was that it really gets into the nuts and bolts of procedural things in part three.
All right.
So
Okay.
those are the three parts. At any little editorializing by me on some of that, but those are the three parts of the exam: individual, business, and then ethics and representation.
All right. So far, I'm just going to be summarizing the steps till now. Obtain a PTIN, create an account on Prometric, start studying, study those parts, and then, whenever you're ready, you take your exam. Now,
Yep.
when you talk, there's this thing that, I see so many courses out there, and then everybody is always like, updating the courses every year because the exam gets updated every year. The tax code gets updated every year, right? So how does this work? I'll just take a step back. One is like, do I need to clear all the three parts in one go, like in that 1 year? And second would be that if I'm not able to clear it, like if I'm not able to clear all the three parts, then how do I need to revise and update my knowledge for the parts that I've already cleared? Can I carry forward? What is it? So can you just enlighten me a little bit there?
So there's 3 years to pass all three parts. So you, I guess, could do, part one this year, part two next year, part three the year after.
Nice.
Um, as far as what changes, I mean, part one is probably the part that has the most changes. And my perception is most people take it in order. They start with part one, then part two, then part three.
Right.
Part one, there's a lot of things that change just because the individual stuff changes with inflation each year. Standard deduction amounts and things like that change every year. Part two, the business part, has fewer changes because there's a lot of stuff on that that's just how do you organize an S corporation, for
Yeah.
example, and those things never change. And then part three, it's kind of the same thing. A lot of the procedural stuff and ethical stuff doesn't change. Some of the penalty amounts change,
Yeah.
but there's not a whole lot that changes year to year in part three either. So, the changes year to year typically are your inflation adjustments would be the biggest thing. And sometimes there's certain provisions that change year to year as well. I mean, because as you say, the tax code is often changing. And
Yeah.
I think that's a good point to bring up is December 31st is the cutoff date.
All right.
So when we talk about, well, let me back up, Saul. I know we want this to be evergreen. Should we
Yeah.
mention years on this? Because, well, let's just put it this way. December 31st of the prior year is what the test will be over. So if you take the test, let's just say, and you're starting your studying in May of 2024,
Yep.
you're going to be looking at 2023 tax law as of December 31st. And so what that means is sometimes the government will pass tax laws in the new year that are retroactive to the prior year.
Yep.
Those changes will not be on the exam. And so that can be really confusing. It can also be difficult if you are preparing tax returns and you have to know what those law changes are, but they're not going to be on the exam because December 31st is the cutoff date for the content of the exam. Now, if in real life you're listening to this in 2024, there were no changes to the law in 2024 that were retroactive to 2023.
Yeah.
So you're lucky. But in some years, Congress will sometimes pass things in February or March that are retroactive to the prior year that you, of course, need to know about for preparing tax returns, but you don't need to know about for taking the exam.
Well, that's a relief, right? I mean, like it's less stressful because
Yeah.
it's they've drawn the line. The law as of 31st December of the prior year, we are going to be testing you for that in the current year. And talking about testing, I guess there's a testing window, right? You can't really take the test like all around the year. Like what is the testing window?
So the testing window opens May 1st. I'd be interested to see statistics on how many people actually take the exam in the month of May. I'm sure there's some people who do. I
Yeah.
know the dates that are listed on the Prometric website for India are like June 21st or something, at least in the current year. As we're talking, it's in June. So, some people are taking it pretty early in the exam window, but it's a 10-month exam window. So it opens May 1st and runs through the end of February, so the 28th or 29th, depending on if it's a leap year or not, of the next year. And
Oh,
then, once the 28th or 29th of February passes, then there's like a lockout period where you can't take the exam. And that's kind of the period where everybody's updating their materials and so forth to launch a product then on or around May 1st with the current year updates, because sometime in that lockout period, usually around March 1st, the IRS releases what the outline will be for that upcoming testing window, then the exam
right.
outline.
Oh, okay. But I guess, if I were to say it, except for the tax code changes, like, maybe there must be inflation adjustments in income tax, individual and everything. But I guess conceptually, it all remains the same, right? I mean, so like hypothetically, like if I passed my part one in 2022 and I passed my part three, my part three in 2023, and now I'm preparing for my part two in 2024, but I'll obviously be able to take the exam from May. But then if I'm still referring to a material from 2023 or 2022 of business, conceptually it will still be the same, correct? I mean, the only thing that would change
Correct.
is probably the rates, I guess.
Correct. Most things, there's certain numbers that change year to year, but a lot of the conceptual ideas really never change.
Oh, that's good, because you can refer to old material, because at the end of the day, it's the concept that's important, right? The rates
Right.
are it's a continuous exercise. Now, during this exam window, how many times can I take the exam?
I believe it's 3 or 4 times that you can retake the exam.
Oh, okay. So it's not like, I can just keep on taking it.
You do have a right. It's like it's either 3 strikes and you're out or 4 strikes and you're
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Yes. So you do get a retake if necessary, but passing it about as soon as you can without retakes is probably the best thing that could happen.
Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. 4 times
4
per
times.
part,
Okay.
4 times in the exam window is what is allowed. Yeah. But surprisingly, like a lot of people think that, there are some costs involved that people are not aware of. Like you did mention that, for getting your PTIN, you need to pay a small amount, $19.95 for getting your PTIN. Creating an
Yeah.
account with Prometric, I don't think really has any fees associated with it. But I guess there is a fee to register for the exam, and that's kind of like non-refundable. Like, if you missed it, you missed it. You can't really, so you got to be very careful. Or
That's
can you carry forward? What is it allowed?
It is, so it's $259.
Yeah.
And on the IRS website, it says it's non-refundable and non-transferable.
Ooh.
So it's due at the time you schedule your appointment.
All right.
So 259 times 3 is 700 and some dollars, 768, I think is what it is. So I mean, it's when you figure that plus whatever the cost is of the review materials that you purchase, I mean, there is a cost involved with it. So this is more accessible certainly than some of the other licensing exams that are out there, but it's not completely costless or completely free. I guess you're going to pay probably minimum of around $1,000, maybe more.
Absolutely. So I guess, what we want to do is we want to keep this strategic. I guess what you'd want to do is you probably want to make a small investment to get your PTIN, create your free account on Prometric. So you have that there. So you know when are the exams happening in your location. And then you're studying for it. So you'll probably pay a small amount for taking that course from wherever you want to take it. Like MY-CPE also has, it's one of the most cost effective, but then we got other places. And we'll talk a little bit about the course on MY-CPE because you're the one preparing, so you know better. But when you schedule the exam, I wouldn't want to ask you how was your experience while scheduling the exam. All right, so could you just like tell about the exam, like how long is the exam, and a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when you show up at the testing center, I mean, first of all, it could be a little intense and intimidating because like they take all your stuff away from you and you're going into this compound basically where there's a bunch of computers and you sit at a station and take the test. They allow 3.5 hours is how much time? 3 hours and 30 minutes to take the exam. The actual scheduled window is 4 hours because there's a 15-minute tutorial and then you're allowed a 15-minute break at some point, I guess whenever you want it. So it's a 4-hour window in total and 3.5 hours to actually take the exam.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I'm just able to remember. Yeah, you know, because there's a tutorial, then you, and after you, I guess after 50 questions are done, you have a 15-minute break, and then afterwards you can come back and you start off and everything, and then you complete. I think there's also a survey after the exam or something like that.
Mhm.
So that kind of like takes up the hours. But I actually got this. I was reading this, and it was surprising for me as well, because I thought that it must be like a clocked timer thing, like you can just pause the timer and then you go and then you can come back wherever you want. But I read on Reddit that there's a timer to the exam, and as soon as you reach the 58 questions, you answered it, and then the timer like pauses, and it pauses for like 15 minutes. But like if you're not back in 15 minutes, the timer will start. you know so it's not like it's gonna take its own sweet time for you to be back on a seat. So it's so funny. Oh, okay, but okay. Let's assume that somebody passed all the exams. We have done with all the exams. All the exams are done, and you're great. Then like how do you get the like certificate? Does it get emailed to you, or do you got to pay additional fees to get your enroll agent certificate?
There's no additional fees as far as getting your exam results, but then you have to apply for enrollment with the IRS. Now they'll know that you passed the exam because the results get passed on to the IRS, but you fill out a bunch of things for the IRS and have to pass. Basically, the biggest thing is passing the background check at
Yes.
that point. And that can be a waiting game too. It's probably a little faster now than it was in 2009 when I did it, but you submit that and then you wait for the IRS or the Treasury Department to send you your enrollment card. So you kind of watch the mail, and eventually it'll arrive, and off you go then in your career as an enrolled agent.
A curious question. Once you've obtained your PTIN, does it like remain with you for your whole life, or does it expire, or
You have to renew it every year.
okay. So you got to pay that fee and
You pay
keep
that
it up.
$19.75 every year, and you have to attest to, I forget all the things you have to attest to. Basically, you're attesting to, I think you have to say that you have a data security plan,
Yeah.
which is a big deal. A bigger deal if you're preparing tax returns and you pay your fee. It's not hard to
Yeah.
renew your PTIN. You do it online and it takes about 30 seconds. But I guess the short answer to your question is it stays with you for life as long as you renew it. If you don't renew it, then you would lose it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, obviously we don't, even if you're a student, I guess, even if you're a multi-year student, I guess that's a very critical point, because you want to keep the PTIN active, because the PTIN is
That's
connected to
correct.
your prometric and that's connected to your exam. So you want to keep
Yes.
PTIN active. Okay. Very
And there's a
interesting.
renewal. Yeah, there's a renewal window. I
Uh-huh.
think it starts late October, maybe
Yeah.
November 1st through December 31st. So, if you're listening to this now and you're getting your PTIN because you're moving forward with the exam, don't forget, and the IRS will send reminders to you by email that you need to
Yeah.
renew. But you also need to make sure to renew and get that done, even if you haven't gotten your EA designation yet and you're still studying for the exam. That number does need to be renewed each year.
All right. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Now, if you could just like subtly tell about the enroll agent exam, right? Because you prepared it, and some unique features about the enroll exam prep course that MY-CPE is. If you could just tell a little bit about that.
So there's several parts to it. I mean, one is we put a lot of time into creating videos of all the different parts. We basically follow the exam outline on what we cover in the slides. The slides, though, are kind of the introduction to the topic, and sometimes they go deep, but a lot of times it's designed more to just get your mind focused on what we're talking about and give an overview of the subject. Then there's written material too, like workbooks and more in-depth examples and so forth that you can look at. And then I always like, now it depends on how you study, I suppose. Some people might want to study from the slides. Some people might want to study from the workbook. I'm someone who always thinks that working test questions is an excellent way to study. So you have sample test questions that cover all the different angles of the material.
Yep.
With explanations provided for why the answer is what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that studying, it's good to watch those videos for the overview, read the workbook, work some samples and stuff, and go through the examples, but then get into those test questions and work. And the nice thing about the MY-CPE way that it's done is that test questions are mapped to the different parts of the exam. And so after you've watched certain parts of the material, you can then take test questions relating specifically to that material. I found in some of the other reviews sessions that are out there, you have to, you don't know for sure what you're going to get next as far as the next question is. I think that's one of the selling points of the MY-CPE system. And then you're studying, so that's kind of on your own type studying. Then we have mentoring sessions where we will meet, and I like to view it almost as being like part of a special group, basically, where you get to kind of step in and we take care of you and we help you and we want to see you succeed in the exam. And so we have mentoring sessions where we'll also work through sample test questions, and we like to call them doubt solving. What do we call it? Doubt solving sessions.
Yes.
Where we help the student with the things that they have concerns about. And it's all about helping you pass. And passing licensing exams is very stressful because these test questions, a lot of these test questions are written to be kind of gotcha type of questions. And some of them pull out some things that are quite deep and quite out there. You have to be prepared for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I guess I also love the fact that, when we came up with the course, we noticed that, every year the updates happen, and then other platforms would kind of like, if you want the updated course, you got to pay a certain amount. But that's the thing that we wanted to eliminate. And when we came up with the course, that's one thing that we came up with. You buy it once and then you get free updates until you pass all the 3 parts. So that's very unique. All right. So as we are approaching towards the end, I'm just going to summarize our entire conversation. All right. And correct me if I've missed something. All right.
Yep.
Step 1, to become an enroll agent, you get your PTIN. After you got your PTIN, you create your account on Prometric, but don't schedule the exam yet. You first enroll for an exam prep course from any of the providers, MY-CPE, that if you want, I would recommend that is. But I'm prejudiced, but there are advantages why I'm saying that. Get an exam prep course done, get yourself prepared. You also need to remember that you don't need to give all the 3 parts all together. You can give 1 part this year, 1 part next year. You got to be cognizant about the exam window. So you can take your exam from May from current year to February of the next year. And whenever you're registering for the exam, there is a fee that you pay that is non-refundable and non-transferable. So you want to be very careful about that. And once you clear all the parts, you just submit the application and then they do their stuff and then you get your application and everything. So that's it. Have I missed anything?
No, nope. I think the only other thing that I would say, and this is something that you would get into once you actually get into the studying for the exam, but taking not just this test, but any licensing test, it's not just the gotcha questions. It's the just learning the way that questions are worded and what are they really asking about.
Yeah.
And making sure you have 3.5 hours to take this exam. So there's no need to rush through the question. read the question and make sure you understand what it's really asking about. And then, work through a process. Usually there'll be at least one answer that's obviously wrong, and
Yeah.
you can eliminate that one.
Yeah.
And then you work through a process of elimination on it. But I think reading the question, and also don't be intimidated if you're coming into this and you don't have a lot of tax preparation experience, because I actually think in some ways people who haven't prepared tax returns in the past or don't have a lot of experience are sometimes in a better spot, because I think if you have a lot of experience, the other thing you have to do is remove those mental blocks of looking at a question and wanting to follow it up with a bunch of follow-up questions. The question is asking this, and your mind as a preparer immediately says, well, it depends. What about this? And what
Yeah.
about this? And what about this? Well, the question isn't going there. The
Yeah.
question is asking one thing, and
Yeah.
your mind has to just focus on, oh, okay, and here's the answer choices. And so the best answer for this question is this. And so I think sometimes the more experience that you have, sometimes the worse it can be with these kinds of exams, because you start asking too many questions yourself instead of just answering the question that's presented to you. But these are all test taking strategies that we would talk about in the mentoring sessions and so forth.
Okie dokie. I mean, this is great. Jason, it's been incredibly informative. I'm sure our listeners now have a clear picture of the EA designation, right? So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And to our listeners, we hope this session has illuminated the path to become an enroll agent. So stay tuned for more episodes where we figure out the ins and outs of professional growth. Until next time, keep learning and exploring. Cheers.